Welcome back to the North Star Takes podcast. I'm Bailey Policki. He's Jacob Liberta, and we're a Minnesota sports podcast. If you're a Minnesota sports fan, please click the like button on this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. Today, we're going to be talking Minnesota Wild as they're kind of rebounding here after a slow start to the season where they gave up a ton of goals, played horrible defense, had horrible goaltending. Over their last 3 games, they've had points in each game, going 2-0-1. And I mean, offensively, they've had, really good games here to start the season. That hasn't been the concern. Defensively is where the concern is. And it seems like they're slowly starting to tighten up in that area. Um, you know, they've moved Dumba down to the third defensive pairing, which I thought was interesting. Fleury's finally starting to bounce back. So what do you make of the Wild start to the season here, Liberta? Obviously a little bit up and down, but overall, I guess, what are your thoughts on where this team stands?
Yeah, with the up and down nature of these first 6 games, the first three obviously being awful, the last three being much better, I don't really know what this team is yet. I think when you look at the first 3 games and what went wrong, I mean, you named it. Defensively, we were terrible. Our goaltending, I mean, Fleury was a sieve in there, and then we threw Gustafsson into there too. I mean, he was bad, and it's just like left you a lot of question marks as far as like how good this team can be this year if our defense is really that bad, because that was kind of suspect a little bit at points last year when the team
Mm-hmm.
struggled in a good season that we had. So it's like coming into this year, I felt like with a little less offensive firepower with the departure of Fiala, it's like I think our defense might need to be a little bit tighter. So then you consider those first 3 games giving up 20 goals. That's just unacceptable. You can't do that.
Right.
So I think that was definitely worrisome. And then to come out in that fourth game, it was the end of the 4-game homestand to start the year, and to almost lose to Vancouver. Vancouver is not a good team either. Like that's a bad squad that you need to beat every time, at least, especially at home, at least. And we had to grind that one out in overtime. But in the end, it was 2 points for us. I mean, of course, it was Kirill that buried the game winner and got us back on
Mm-hmm.
the right track. I know kind of lost a close one with Boston, which was kind of fortunate. I felt like that was a game we could have won, but kind of is what it is sometimes. And then, especially giving up that goal in the last 10 seconds of overtime, that kind of hurts.
Yeah.
And then I'd say to winning pretty convincingly against Montreal too after shuffling up the line combinations. I thought that was interesting. So I'm curious. I think Dean will probably tinker with it as this season goes on, as we go through these runs, these streaks where maybe we're up or down. So I think, namely, like you mentioned, Dumbo get moved down to the third line. I think that's definitely an eyebrow raiser, and I think it looked a lot better though when they were pairing Brody and Spurgeon together along with Milton and Addison. So like to
Mm-hmm.
see that. And then Fleury obviously kind of getting settled into the season after just a poor start, about as bad as you can draw it up. But it's a Hall of Fame goalie that I think we all kind of put the brakes on a little bit as far as the criticism goes and give him a little bit of time. He is up there in age, but it's like
Yeah.
he's got a proven track record that you kind of just got to trust, I think. And then offensively, like you said, I don't think there's been too much concern there. I think we've done a fine job putting pucks in the net, but it's just that I think finding a steadiness to this team as far as not going total Jekyll and Hyde between the first 3 games and the last 3 games.
Right.
So I kind of just figured out what we are yet. I think there's still a lot to be determined, but I, um, yeah, I don't know. It's just it kind of leaves me with more question marks than I felt like I had at the beginning of the season, or before the season started, I should say. I don't know. How are you feeling right now, Bailey?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I just think obviously those first 3 games were so alarming just because the Wild
Yes.
for the last decade has been a defensive minded team.
Mm-hmm.
Just solid defense, going back years, starting with Ryan Suter. Obviously, you factor in Brodeen and Spurgeon into the mix. Um, so yeah, that was troubling for sure. Seeing Fleury struggle that much was definitely troubling, just because he's getting up there in age. But I'm glad they've seemed to have at least tightened that up a little bit. We knew going into the season that Kaprizov was going to still be a superstar, and he and Zuccarello were going to have fantastic chemistry, which we've already seen so far this season. So that's been good to see. The emergence of Matt Boldy, I think, has been super encouraging. He's looking really solid so far to start this season. Um, Marco Rossi, who is now on Boldy's line, thankfully, started the season on the fourth line. Then he was benched, and then he had to sit out for a game. I don't know, whatever the coaches had against him. It was weird. But now he finally gets to be on Boldy's line. He's getting a legit shot at this, and he seemed to play pretty well against Montreal. So hopefully that's a step in the right direction. I think maybe once he gets a goal or an assist or some points under his belt, maybe you'll really start to see him take off. So I think that's exciting. Just having to break up, Eriksson, Ek, and Foligno, I think has been a little disappointing, but if they're not producing, Erickson X actually been doing pretty good this season, but Foligno, you haven't seen much from. Hartman, you haven't seen much from, which I think we came to kind of expect. I mean, those guys were not going to perform like they did last year. So, yeah, I don't know. I still feel like this team's got the talent where they definitely could still fight for a wild card spot. I'm not 100% certain they could fight for a top 3 spot in this division just because I think Colorado's super good. St. Louis Blues are super good still. Nashville, we always struggle against, and they're just a tough matchup. And then even the Dallas Stars are off to a hot start this season, which I'm still not a huge believer in that team, but
No.
they made the playoffs last year, didn't they? They were a wild card.
They did, yeah. I think they got bounced by Calgary round one, I want
Yeah,
to say.
the
Yeah.
kind of out of nowhere they got into the playoffs, and
Mhm.
so they could fight for a spot again this year too. But the Western Conference is challenging. The Kings look pretty good with Fiala. Obviously, still got Edmonton out there. Vegas, I think, will be better this year. So, um, yeah, just some interesting teams in this conference. And I didn't even mention Calgary. I guess Calgary could still be pretty good too. But yeah, I don't know. It's difficult. It's like you said, it almost leaves you with more questions than answers. From when we started the season, just because I think we felt coming into the season this team would play better defensively, but that just hasn't been the case so far. But it's still early, and I think Dean Evason and Bill Guerin were both extremely disappointed with the way things started, and they both kind of voiced those frustrations. So I'd like to think from this point forward, I mean, if we're going to lose to teams, it's because it's teams like Colorado that just have more pure talent than us and more speed and stuff like that, rather than just getting completely outworked, out hustled, and all the mental mistakes that we've made defensively, and even committing penalties and going to the penalty box. Our penalty kill still isn't fantastic. The power play looks like it's improved though, which has been promising, especially with Kalen Addison running the point on the power play. I love that he's in there now instead of Matt Dumba. Just a much more calming presence, a smarter player with the puck on his stick. So there's a lot of things to like, but there's also a lot of things that are very questionable. And yeah, it'll just be interesting to see how they kind of straighten it out as the season goes here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, kind of going back to the goaltending. I brought this up with Fleury. I think we have a patient. I think he'll be fine. But at the same time, I'm kind of curious what we're going to look like in those nights he doesn't play because I don't have a lot of trust in Gustafson.
Right.
And I think that's going to be more games of him out there playing than people will maybe realize and maybe come to expect. Obviously, Fleury being upwards of 40 years old, I think that definitely plays a factor in this that he's just not going to be able to go out there and start 60 games like that. I don't think that's realistic. So,
Right.
you see Gustafson quite often, and that doesn't really leave me with a good feeling. So, I'm kind of worried about those games. And then, really, the defense as a whole, just being able to kind of gel. I know we're definitely juggling the lines here. I'm about had it with Dumba, and I think a lot of people have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just going to be too about probably staying healthy, especially those top guys. Like for instance, an Addison, who seems to be very important on the power play, and then Middleton, Spurgeon, Brodin. I think all these guys got to stay healthy, otherwise we might be that might be hurting real bad. So
Yeah.
I'd like to I'd like to think that we're gonna be fine there, but you just never know. I think they've all for instance, Brodin. I know he gets nicked up every now and then, so when he misses time, it feels pretty evident. So I have my concerns there. And then as far as offensively, like you said, I'm not too worried about that. I do have some questions for Dean about why we're putting Rossi in the doghouse. Why we're not just letting him play through struggles, even if he's playing great. Do you really
Right.
want to shuffle some of those other guys out there that we got? I don't feel fantastic about that. So I'd kind of like to see him get significant run, and I like that now. He's getting to play with talented players around him. For instance,
Mm-hmm.
a Boldy, he's coming into his own, which is great. And
Yep.
then obviously Kirill is doing Kirill things. So it's offensively, I think we're going to be fine, but it's just kind of coming together and playing a full team game like we did really in Montreal. So
Yep.
yeah, a lot to be decided. It's very early, so we don't know what's fact, what's fiction. So I would say that I'm curious, like you said, the improved power play. I'm hoping that's sustainable because that was big. That had to have been a big point of emphasis in the offseason after how bad
Yeah.
we were at last year. So excited about that and hope there's more good things to come there.
Absolutely. And you mentioned defensemen as well. I'm glad that Merrill's back now, and that kind of puts Goligoski in the doghouse. It's funny
Yes.
because Goligoski got his 1,000th game, and now he's just he can sit down because I mean he was abysmal to start the season too. So I mean Merrill's not amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but for a third line defenseman, he's fairly solid. So I'm glad that he's back, and that kind of just solidifies things a little more. And yeah, them not being afraid to move Dumba down to the third line, even though he's a alternate captain on this team. Um, I'm glad that they have the gall to do that too. So yeah, some interesting stuff going on here. Obviously, it's a bummer they don't have like a Kevin Fiala anymore. They don't have Talbot, who's just another reliable goaltender. So there's definitely some question marks, but um, and like you mentioned earlier, the Parisi and Suter cap hits. I mean, once those go away, we're going to be in a good spot. So it's tough for now. They're still trying to be a competitive team, be a good team, but I think we all just need to realize within a couple of years here when those cap hits come off the books, this thing could really explode in a good way. So not to mention there's a ton of other prospects we have, um, that'll be coming up with in the next couple of years. And then we got this Brock Faber in the Fiala trade, the defenseman from the Gophers. People think as soon as the college season's done, he's going to be ready to play pro. And if he signs with the Wild, I mean, that gives us a right-handed shot defenseman. I mean, that's pretty important. And then it's like, well, who's the odd man out? Probably Matt Dumba. So it's something to think about at that time. But
yeah, it's juicy. Oh boy.
yeah, so that's exciting that he could potentially step in, especially if we're on the verge of the playoffs and stuff like that. So, any other final thoughts from you before we take off here?
Yeah, I guess I didn't even consider that. I think that's a really juicy nugget to throw out there. Like you said, a guy who maybe can contribute right away after that Gopher season ends and being a right-handed shot, replacing Dumba. I mean, I'm here for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be crazy to think about just because of the money Dumba's making, and he's an alternate captain on this team. But that might
Yeah,
be that might be the point we get to.
true. And the only flaw in that I can see is like Garen's typically a guy who likes to play prospects in Iowa at least for a
Right.
year or two, probably even with top guys like, for instance, Boldy Rossi, I think come to mind, and I think they like to let them play in the system and really come up through it and earn their way on in this team. But I guess you never know. Maybe Faber will be ready to go right from the jump. So that would obviously be most ideal.
Yeah, it probably will just depend how desperate they are too for help on
Good,
defense. So
good point. And then we could be in a pretty bad spot by then. Who knows?
right, if Dumba's playing well, they probably won't force the issue. But
True.
anyways, that will do it for this edition of the North Star Takes podcast. Please click the like button on this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. Feel free to give us a follow on both Twitter and Instagram, and let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you think about the Wild start to this season? Are you still concerned defensively and about the goaltending? And any other thoughts you might have on this Wild team, including Marco Rossi and why he's been in the doghouse? Anything that comes to mind about the Wild, leave your comments below. And until next time, thanks for watching.